welcome to I Remember When, sponsored by the Gresham Historical Society. I'm Gwenda McCall. This is the 8th month in production for this show, and I'd really like to thank our audience for the letters and phone calls of support that we've received from you. If you would like to tell us something about our show or give us some ideas, you can write to us at the Gresham Historical Society, Box 65, Gresham, Oregon 97030. Our guest this evening is a perfect example of the wonderful senior citizens in East County community who are working for the Historical Society and saving the history for the people in this community. This lady is the chairman of special events. I'd like you to meet Betty Peterson. Betty, thank you for joining us this evening.
Well, thank you, Glenda. I'm delighted to be here. Just hope that I can do a good job.
Well, I know you have some fun stories to tell us. Let's start, though, way back with your history. Now, you weren't born in Gresham.
No. My great-grandparents came from Ireland and to Nauvoo, Illinois, and then migrated to Kansas, where my family was born. My mother and father were both born, and were farm people around Kansas.
Now, this is a photo of your father.
This is a picture of my father. I think that's his graduation from law school picture.
Oh, handsome. And then how did he meet your mother?
Well, they grew up together.
Oh.
All the farm families grew up together, and my mother's family, the Atwoods, were considered quite well-to-do because they had a house in Gardner, and then, of course, had their farm. But I was born in Spring Hill, Kansas, which is close to the Missouri border, not far from Gardner in Johnson County, and delivered by my great-uncle, Dr. Kelly, and my great-aunt, who was Aunt Bird Shields. And then after I was born, my mother, when I was 6 weeks old, took me back to the mines.
Yes, that's right. Now, your father wasn't a lawyer at this time. He was working in the silver mines in Colorado.
The silver mines in Colorado.
And why did he choose to do that rather than being a lawyer?
He set up practice in Kansas City with another man as a partner and found that he had asthma or allergies, I suppose, and he couldn't handle the climate. So he went out where his two brothers were, working in the mines up in southwestern Colorado, and above a place called Telluride. And he was working in the mines, but he knew my mother, and he came back and married her on the 8th of June. 1910.
Now, you brought some pictures that I'd like us to just scan of living in the Colorado mountains around the mining camps. And the shack, the little cabin.
They were cabins,
not
shacks.
Excuse me.
My goodness.
But it's not a very fancy place. Had this kind of a view. It looks like you're up above the timberline.
Oh, yes.
And then this is the picture of some of the pack horses.
The mule teams that brought everything up. Or is that a pack horse?
Well, mule
No,
team.
I think mule teams.
And this is a picture of your folks riding horses.
They are up the top of the Continental Divide there, and they did a lot of horseback riding, and they rode over the Continental Divide from Telluride over to Silverton, if anybody knows that geography there.
And this is a picture of you.
Yes.
About 3 years old.
I think so.
What was your dolly's name? Do you remember?
Haven't any idea.
Oh, you didn't save
No.
her? Oh, gosh. And then we have another picture of the house that your mom brought you to live in the summer and spring months, but not all year round.
Well, just after Christmas, the women had to leave because of avalanches, and the men had to stay in the boarding house. So my mother either took me back to Kansas or took me to Texas, Brownsville, Texas, to her sisters where they stayed. And so we did get a little bit of moving around there. But when they first were married and went up to the mines via railroad and then narrow gauge railroad, why, they had a one-room cabin. Then when I was born, the company got generous and gave them a two-room cabin.
Oh.
So I could probably have a nap. And one day, my father was working graveyard shift, so he was asleep, and my mother had me in the buggy next to his bed, and both our beds, the bed was against the end of the cabin. An avalanche came down and took off the end of the cabin right behind our beds.
But didn't hurt either one of you?
Didn't hurt either one of us, but it crushed an English couple in a cabin down below, and that day my mother had 11 bodies on her kitchen floor.
Oh, how awful.
Well, it was, I had nothing to do with it, but it was a sad thing. Mm-hmm.
Oh, and these two pictures are of your dad being silly, sticking out
Yeah.
his tongue, and a picture of your mother over by a creek, it looks like.
Well, that was a creek that flowed not too far from our cabin, and my dad had rigged up a water supply system so that we had running water in the cabin, which was pretty fancy.
Your parents must have really been adventuresome.
They enjoyed that. That was one of the...
That's wonderful. Now, they moved on then, and this is a picture taken in Florida of your
Yes,
father on the right.
after the mine altitude, the altitude at the mines was 25 feet lower than the top of Mount Hood. And the name of the community at the mine was Smuggler Union Mine, and my mother was the postmaster. And most of her business was sending home money for the foreigners, mostly Southern European people who came over there and made some money and then went home again.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And
so the climate at the mines wore out for my father. And I can recall, I was very small, but I can recall his coming in the door and his face almost dark blue and falling on his face. He'd make it as far as the door. So we went back to Kansas, and that wasn't any good for him either. So we tried Florida. So we went to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and we lived on the New River in a house on stilts that had a boardwalk to get out to the road where we could go to town or anything that went right over a swamp.
oh my.
And we had a noisy alligator who croaked and carried on, so the neighbors were complaining. So my dad went out and shot him. So this is my father. The alligator, he shot him right in the eye. And for years, we hauled that alligator hide around when we moved. My dad took it to the Seminole Indians and had it tanned. And so every time we moved, that alligator hide went along in a burlap bag.
Oh, that's
This
funny.
is Mr. Krevling, the man who owned the property, and it was a grapefruit farm. And there's me, of course.
Mm-hmm. Cute. All right. Now, when you came to Gresham, your family moved in a home on First Street.
No,
not
no.
originally.
Wait a minute, not originally. We came out and stayed with Dr. Will Ott while his wife and 2 children were in the east. Then we moved down across from the high school, and then we moved out to the corner of Division, well, what is Division now, used to be Section Line, and Birdsdale.
Oh, and that's where your mother
That's where my mother taught herself to drive the Model T.
Tell them that story. That's so funny.
Birdsdale didn't go between Powell and Division, but our little path, our little roadway up to the garage went up where Birdsdale is now on that sharp pitch. My mother had driven, when she was reared on the farm, she had driven 6-horse teams and that sort of thing, and was quite a tomboy, and she was not going to be deterred from driving a car, though ladies weren't supposed to. So she taught herself to drive, and she'd get me, I'm an only child, she'd get me out in the garage to help her push that Model T out into that driveway, and she'd put the brake on, and then she'd climb in and take the brake off and start down the hill and go right across what is now Division and zip on down Birdsdale until she could get the engine started, and then she would turn around and come back up and turn around at the top by the garage, and then down she'd go again. Luckily, there wasn't much traffic, but
Did she
taught herself to drive, yes.
Then did she drive into town? And
Oh, yes.
everything? It was
And she
accepted
drove
then once she
from
learned.
there on. She drove until she was almost 81.
Oh, for heaven's sake. Now, here we have some more car pictures that were taken when you were about 10 years old.
Yeah, this is a Franklin, an air-cooled Franklin, and they were big during the early 20s. And so we had 2 of them. We had a touring car that had isinglass windows and had the little buttons that you button on the windows when it rained. And then we had a closed one. But every Saturday, if we wanted to go anyplace over Sunday, why, my dad would take the engine of the Franklin and wash it all in gasoline and then stick it back in, and then we'd take off. But many of the cars we had, we used to go out to Dodge Park and go swimming. And many of the time, my friends and I have had to walk up the hill at Dodge Park, because some of these cars you had to turn around and back them up the hill because that got more gas to the engine.
Oh, my.
Yeah,
I never heard of
interesting.
such a thing.
Well, you're just too
tip
young,
of the-
dear.
And this is a picture of you with your birthday cake, and you're probably about 10 years
Yeah,
old
that was the original house on the property at First and at the head of Wilson Avenue on First.
Oh, that's
the
right.
old house.
That's the house that you really spent the most time in growing up.
No, I didn't.
No?
They built the new house in 1925. That was
So
when
it's-
I was close to graduating from grade school. I guess most of my time.
So it's right at the end of Wilson Avenue on First, looking south towards Gresham
Yeah.
Butte that we call Walters Hill. And you have some good memories of playing on Walters Hill when you were little.
I didn't play on Walters Hill. I played on Gresham Butte,
I'm
which is the
sorry.
proper name of the thing. But I can't scold you. Somebody got it on the map as Walters Hill. And there are several of us who are a little indignant about that, and we think that that name should be returned to the original name of Gresham Butte. Many's the time my friends and I have climbed up the butte. And there was a place up there by Miss Alderson's house where we could look down on the road and the families. Many's the time I've seen my mother out on this front walk here shaking her rugs
From that far away?
from
you
clear
could-
up on the butte.
And you'd play in the snow up there,
Well,
too.
we did a lot of coasting up there, where what used to be a pasture, of course, which is houses now, across the road from the cemetery.
All that Columbia Village area and
Yeah,
up in there.
all
and-
through there
And
is-
Almond Acres.
Yeah,
and-
all
and
bedroom
was-
acres now.
Was all pasture. Great
we,
place
we
for
lost
sledding.
a beautiful pastoral scene, too, for so many years.
Mm-hmm.
We had the Gattenbein farm across the road, and then used to be Curly's down below, and they pastured their cattle up there
Mm-hmm.
on the butte where it wasn't timbered. And you could hear the cows lowing at night, and you could hear their bells ringing, and you know.
Oh, what nice memories.
But all gone now. And then after they didn't pasture so many cattle up there, we had red foxes that we could hear at night, too. But I guess too many people and too many homes. Is,
Gresham's growing.
and then when in our own home, when we first moved there, we had china pheasants that roosted in the big tree.
Is that right?
And every time at night we turned the bedroom light on, we'd get scolded by a china pheasant who was roosting in a tree. But we have no more livestock anymore, an occasional rabbit that comes from
No,
somewhere.
and you said every home had a chicken house in the backyard, too.
Oh, yes, all the homes up on what is called Wallula Heights was platted by Jim Elkington. And when we moved there, this house that was there, it had a chicken house adjoining our garage. And I can remember my mother scrubbing that chicken house out with lye and whitewashing it inside and then scrubbing the roost because the chickens got mites.
Oh, gosh. What a job.
So, yes, women did a lot of work. She also had a washing machine that was run by a water power. And so she washed just outside the back door of this house, alongside the house, and there was a faucet there, and she could hook a hose onto it. And that ran the arm that agitated the clothing. So that wasn't too long ago in my calculation of time, of course. When they say it was 25 years ago that we had the big blow, why, that's a little hard to believe, too.
Oh, the Columbus Day
Yeah.
storm. Uh-huh. Now, this photograph, is your mother in this photograph?
Yes, my mother's in this photograph. There's
She's-
one woman I can't identify, though I suspect I knew who she is. My mother was here.
The first one on the
Yeah,
left.
and Grace Deaton was here, the unidentified woman. And this is Mrs. Jack Schultz, Mrs. Joe Haley, Mrs. Martin, and Mrs. Aylesworth, and Mrs. Adix. And Mrs. Adix was the wife of the doctor in the community that all of us grew up with.
I hope we get a good close-up on these costumes, because this is really a classic picture of the 20s
Yeah,
with these costumes.
probably early 20s.
Early.
Or when about the time maybe I was a freshman in high school. When I came down with chicken pox when my mother was entertaining this bridge club.
Oh, no.
And so Mrs. Adix was kind enough to take the party.
Oh, how nice
And my
of her.
mother took the food down there because none of them wanted to come
Catch the chicken pox.
catch the chicken
Well,
pox
I
from
guess.
me.
You had a story to tell us about the end of World War I that we could connect with this picture.
Oh, yes.
This picture is, for our audience, is Powell and Maine looking south and
Looking north.
north. Thank you. You're right. And this is where the Rexall drug still is, and this building on the left is no longer there. That's the Glass Butterfly parking lot, but it's
Parking
really
lot,
it's public a parking lot. So, looking down Main Street. Now go ahead and tell us the story about the end of World War I.
When we first arrived, My father, incidentally, we came out here from Salt Lake City because he was patriotic, and he wanted to get in the Army, and because of his asthma, he wasn't allowed. So he came out here, actually brought us out here to work in the shipyards, which he did for a little while, but the war soon ended. And when the war ended on November 11th, 1918, of course, word came through, and everybody took to the street and paraded down to this area here, which was a burned-out building. And I can remember my mother giving me a little washpan and a wooden spoon, and I could go down the street banging. Even people were banging on wash tubs. And this was their means of making a lot of racket. Then, when they got down here, everybody got down here and gathered in a big crowd. This was a burned-out building. They burned an effigy of the Kaiser. They hung this effigy up on a cross, or a cross arm, and then burned it, which was a horrifying thing for me.
Yeah, you were just a little girl.
Just a little child, and didn't understand what the dickens. And of course, I thought they were burning a real man.
Oh, how awful.
Yeah.
And then when this building was rebuilt, it was the Ely building, which is now...
Ely building.
Mm-hmm.
Ely
building, which is now Pacific Crest, Main Street, and Cloud Tree and Sun. So I think
this
it's an interesting
building
bit
here
of history.
has kind of, that's the Amiton building here, which is
white
still
one,
there.
uh-huh.
And upstairs is a beautiful hardwood floor where we used to dance. And when my mother and father were in the Masonic organization, they were at one time chairman of the Arima Club dance thing, and once a month they had a dance up there. And people went, and then they also had a kitchen and a little dining area, so that sometimes the organizations would have dinners up there too. Mm-hmm. But I can remember, that's where I learned to dance, was up on that maple floor.
Over Amiton Furniture.
Yeah, over
That's
Amiton.
Great. Now, when you met Pete, he was about 7 years older than you. Tell us the story about how you met your husband.
Oh, that's fun. My mother and father, my father did business with Mr. Peterson, invested some of his money or did something like that.
Mr. Peterson was a farmer.
Mr. Peterson was a farmer, and they lived on 282nd, which used to be Boring Road. That's where they bought their 20 acres and built their home. Anyway, the Petersons asked the Thorns to come for Sunday dinner. And my dad and I were kind of mischievous, and my poor mother always was trying to keep us orderly and straight. And we weren't very cooperative. But we'd been playing golf that morning. We came in, and she said, "Now listen, you were so late. We're going to be late to the Petersons, and they're very not tardy people." She said, "We are supposed to be there for dinner at 1 o'clock, and we've got to be there." All the way driving out to the Petersons, I didn't want to go to begin with, but my mother made me. Got this lecture from my mother. Now remember, these are religious people, and they say grace at the table. So you two be sure and bow your heads, close your eyes, fold your hands, and behave yourselves while they say grace. So we came in with quite a flurry, and their son, they'd made him stay home because the Peterson girl was coming, or the Thorne girl was coming. He didn't want to stay there either, neither did I want to go, so we were even there. But anyway, we sat down at the table, and my father and I very dutifully bowed our heads, closed our eyes, and folded our hands. And Mr. Peterson said to my father, "Have some potatoes."
So your mother predicted wrong.
My dad and I had a terrible time keeping a straight face. There was no grace at the table at that time, though they were religious people. Mm-hmm. So Pete and I, there was a plane landed in the field, across from McBain's, a little plane. So he invited me to go over and see it with him, but I had on high heels. And I remember how kind of romantic it was. When I got back, my heels and my shoes were muddy from walking out in the field. So he bent down and wiped off my heels and shoes for me.
What a gentleman. That impressed you.
Oh, yes, really. I never got him to do it again, but that's
But he courted you for about 9 years, didn't he?
Well, that was tough times through that time.
Mm-hmm.
I graduated from college in '33 and went to work for the power company, and as a demonstrator, and ran their store in Oregon City. So, but he had to work during the day at his plumbing trade, and then farm at night in order to keep the farm going and keep the family.
So he was
together.
too busy to court you, really?
Well, he was too poor to court me.
Oh,
That's
bless
the
his
whole
heart.
thing. But it was a matter of survival to take care of his mother and father. His father was badly crippled from the age of 12 because he fell in Sweden with 2 buckets of milk on his shoulder yoke, and he hit an icy spot and fell and broke his right hip, so that the bone, instead of facing forward, you know, as a hip bone should, was broken and was flat to his, went crosswise of his body. And so his one leg was probably maybe 5 inches shorter than the other.
Oh my! Now we're talking about an accident that would have happened in about 1870.
Yes,
so they
probably.
Didn't have...
They had no way to restore him or fix it or anything, so he just grew that way.
But he was a powerful man, though, wasn't he?
Well, he had to learn, because he was the second son, that he couldn't stay with the family, because the first son always takes over the family operation, and so he went to, and he was upset badly because his best friend's father was the one who evidently filched his family's fortune.
Oh, gosh.
So he came to the United States steerage, like everybody did then. Landed in Ellis Island. He had a fellow whom he knew with him. So they went to Illinois, because there were dairy farms there, and they could work in a dairy farm and take the time to learn the English language.
And then he went on to college and became a lawyer.
No, that wasn't my father. This is Pete's father.
I'm sorry. I knew you were talking about Pete's father. I drifted away.
That's all right. But anyway, Pa did learn the English language, and then he went on to Seattle, where there was a Swedish community and a Swedish church. And he became a roofer. Now, I don't understand why, with that damaged hip, that he would be able to go up, but he did a lot of black tar paper and tarring on roofs.
Now let's get a look at the picture behind us, because that is a picture of your husband's mother and father on their wedding day. What year would this be about?
Let's see, it was March 18th, 1900.
1900.
And we still have the clock that the Jewish rabbi and his family gave them for a wedding gift. Ma, when she came over here, got together with her brothers and sisters. There were 3 of them over here, and she ended up in Seattle working for a Jewish rabbi as a cook. Was an excellent cook, of course. So when they were married up there in the Swedish Mission Church, why, the gift from the rabbi and his family was this clock that we have. So that's a kind of a memento, too.
Now, your mother brought things over with her from Sweden, and we have some of those here to share with us this evening. Let's start with this large piece over here. What do you call this?
That is a coal hod, and that didn't come from Sweden.
Oh, that's
might
right.
be
That's
English.
right. But it is one of the pieces you brought tonight, and it was so unique I wanted to share this. H-O-D hod, coal hod?
Coal hod. You put coal in it, and then you grabbed it by the back handle. You see there's a metal box in there to hold the coal. You grab it by the back handle and shake it. No, point it down here.
Point it down into the fire.
Point it down at the fire, and then shake it. This flaps. The can doesn't come out, but the lid is all banged up from the coal coming out.
For heaven's sake. It's quite heavy.
Yes, I don't want you to hold it any longer.
But I thought it was something to polish shoes on, and someone thought it was a bread box, but it's a coal hod.
It's a coal hod, and it's possibly English. I don't know the background of it. I bought it at an auction at Underwood, Washington.
Oh, I think that's a neat piece. Or these are the pieces, though, that Mrs. Peterson brought with her. This
is the copper kettle that Pete's mother brought with her when she left Sweden at age 16, and she never returned, which was sad. And those days they used wood stoves, so they had this ring that fitted into a wood stove cooking top, where you take the lid out of the hole, and then this ring fitted onto the kettle so that you got the bottom down right where the fire was to heat it more rapidly. But and this has a spout cover too.
Isn't that beautiful?
But it's an old one, but she was 16 when she came here. And this is the thing from her family that she brought.
That is beautiful.
And her name was Samuelson, but when they became citizens and were naturalized, why, the rest of the family changed their names to Backstrand.
Oh, is that right?
Now, I'm not sure why, but that it was for free if you were a citizen and got citizenship papers. Many of them did change their names.
Okay,
You'd understand a difficult name, like a Norwegian name that has H.J. and that's but Samuelson to Backstrand was a little puzzling. This was something, excuse me, I don't mean to overtalk you.
No, that's fine, go ahead.
This is not anything Ma brought from Sweden. This is simply a coffee mill, and how she got it, why they had itinerant peddlers came by to sell them coffee, and then the fish man, and then the vegetable man, and they all drove wagons out in the country and sold their wares. And when you bought coffee for the first time, you got a free coffee grinder. So this is the way she got it.
Well, we see lots of those in antique stores,
Yeah.
but it's nice to have one with all those memories. Now, I had a picture I set up here, and then we got sidetracked. This is a picture of you taken about the time you graduated from college, right? Lovely. And let's skip on here to this picture of your husband. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about this picture.
That is, I think, the 3rd grade at Orient School. And Charles Quicksall is right here. He was the man who, in about, I guess I was possibly in the 4th grade, that he took the principalship at Gresham. And I grew up under him, and, you know. But he is well remembered by a lot of people here. He raised his family here. He had a son, Harry, and a son, Ralph. And then they lived right next door to my mother and father. So I kind of grew up with the boys.
And your husband is right here, and we'll have a close-up of him in a little while.
Right there, the one with the white bib.
Now, your husband started working as a plumber in about 1921 for a Portland company, and he is well known for putting in a lot of the indoor bathrooms in the farmhouses in the Gresham area, right?
All in the East County, mainly. He was out east of town, in Powell Valley, but yes.
And he did plumbing and heating and dug wells and helped with furnaces. I thought you had an interesting story about the tubs that he put in for the Japanese families.
Oh, yes. We used to, in our sheet metal shop, made a great many Japanese bathtubs, which they made a bathhouse outside. And they were mounted on a frame and then a place where they could build a fire underneath them. And they were big stainless steel or metal tubs. And the Japanese people then had little buckets of soapy water. They soaped themselves down, and then they got into this soaking tub. And they put boards in the tub so that the people could stand on them so they wouldn't burn their feet. And almost every night the Japanese would go out and fire up their bathtubs and soak in them.
Soak. Sounds good to me.
Sounds wonderful. It was just a forerunner of your, you know, your current hot tub.
Betty, we just have a minute left, and I'm really sorry we didn't get more time to talk about your 49 years of marriage with Pete Peterson, who is really Melvin Peterson, but they call him Pete. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about your work with the Historical Society. And I'm really looking forward to the Christmas in the Park that they're having in the little museum. Tell us a little about that.
Christmas in the Old Church.
Old Church. And the date on that is?
November 28th.
It'll be a fun community event. Thank you so much. And I'm Gwenda McCall. Thank you for joining us this evening on I Remember When. Good night.